I'll approach this course as if you were completely ignorant of philosophy, as if you had never even heard about the term philosophy. Well, that's really hard to believe, but that's my approach. I mean, at the same time, I will consider you extremely smart. I want you to be smart. Never believe that you are not smart enough. I mean, sometimes when you don't understand something, it's probably the professor's fault. I believe that when things are explained correctly, everything can be seen at certain level, of course, according to the level of each class, each course. But things can be explained and understood, and the intellect is like a muscle, can be exercised, can practice and become stronger and better, in better shape. So philosophy, I will talk later about a sort of definition of philosophy, the features of the concept of philosophy, what the term philosophy means. But in this very first class, let's just think that philosophy is about deep questions about the world and ourselves and life. And it's about knowledge, it's about passion to know things. And this is kind of what we are. We are beings who need to know more, and we are intrigued and curious. So I also will consider you very curious and very, happy and eager to learn and to see new things in your mind's eyes and your intellect. As I will mention better later, philosophy somehow starts with wonder, with the ability to be surprised, constantly surprised by things around us and ourselves. I mean, who am I? What am I? What are things? And so I also want you to never stop wonder. Don't pay too much attention at conclusions, at specific statements. Just focus on the reasoning, focus on what people see. Sometimes people see the same thing, and it's interesting, but we focus just on their explanation, which may be wrong. But, it's more important to see the same thing. So if you see something during these classes, take notes, and then come back on these notes later, or maybe think about it later. And because philosophy is also going back and forth, using one insight and something that was really kind of made an impression in our intellect and somehow made us really interested in knowing more about it. And again, it's more about seeing a problem than focusing on the conclusion. The conclusion is the last step, and sometimes it may be wrong according to many people who will approach the same question but in different ways. So I'm more interested in this course in showing you some questions, the questions that characterize the beginning of philosophy and kind of characterize the entire history of philosophy ever since. In this course I will focus on Greek philosophy. I'll refer a lot to Greek philosophy, mostly because I think that the best introduction to philosophy is going back to its birth and see what the first philosophers saw and walk their same path. Is this thought experiment of doing exactly what they did, and at that point we will face the same problems. Maybe we will become philosophers ourselves, professional philosophers, because somehow we are all philosophers. We all are interested in deep questions about things and life, and we all want to find answers and to know more. And by the way, philosophy is also historically intriguing. There are so many things that the first philosophers and philosophers throughout history figured out, and they're part of our way to think and to learn today. We don't pay too much attention, enough actually, attention to these things, but it's really something. sometimes even terms that for us are kind of very common, they have a huge, deep philosophical history and meaning. When we go back to that history, we will understand ourselves today much better and in much more nuanced and interesting ways. This is another way to why philosophy is so important in a curriculum of a university, especially a Catholic university. In a Catholic university, philosophy is also crucial because it's since early Christian thinkers, it's always been seen as the servant and of theology. You know, philosophy helps us understand what God revealed to the human beings. So without philosophy, we are not also good Christians, because we are not able to approach correctly the truth of our faith. And you know, this is also kind of technical piece of knowledge. I mean, in history, in the history of Christianity, the truth of the faith have been even defined thanks to the work of philosophers and thanks to the work of the so-called fathers of the church, who tried to interpret the previous knowledge in the light of revelation and trying to use new concepts sometimes to understand better both the world and revelation. So philosophy, I hope that by the end of this course you will agree with me that philosophy is so important and that it helps us a lot understand everything, including our faith. In this first class, way before approaching the first philosophers and see the details of their contribution to the history of ideas and human thought, I want to make another experiment. Since philosophy is all about wondering and trying to see things differently and contemplate about their realities, I want to just see with you something that is very common in our lives, but contemplate it in a different way. So think of something so ordinary, for example, football. I mean, American football, not real football, what you call here soccer. So when you think of football, well, I don't know what would actually come to your attention. Maybe you will think that football is a big business. Maybe it's, well, it's definitely a big deal in this country. So maybe you will think of some players you really like, or how beautiful it is sometimes to go to a football game. Whatever it is that you would think immediately. But let's see if there is something more that football can teach us and that can stimulate our intellectual curiosity. For example, in my case, the first thing that surprises me about football is that we have soccer and you have football. So it looks trivial, but it's not that trivial, right? So behind football there is a choice that your entire culture over the years made, which is different than the choice that an entire different culture made over the same years, and somehow we developed as a culture, as countries, different attitudes towards what? Towards something that is basically the same, right? Because football and soccer are partly the same thing, and tennis and basketball, golf. There is something that would put all of these things together in the same kind of container. Somehow they are the same thing, somehow they are different. Can we say that behind football and soccer and tennis and every other sport or game there is a need we all share, a need for playing? Whatever that might mean in more technical definitions, whatever play or game mean, but in general terms, our need to play, and not just to play, but also to belong to a team, maybe, the feeling of belonging, the competition, the excitement, the physical activity. All these things are needs that we share way before we can have football or soccer or tennis. So what strikes me about these things, you think better about this when you find yourself in a different culture, because you see the same needs expressed in totally different ways that become institutionalized, huge, full of rules and business and people, ways of joking about things, reading the newspapers. So behind these things, we are all the same beings, but we need to express ourselves somehow through our freedom. We make some choices as individuals and as communities, and the two things interact. But there is something before football, American football and soccer, that made us the same beings. So it's fair to say that football at a deeper level can teach us something about human nature, about who we are. We are beings who need something, and this something can be fulfilled in different ways, and these ways are also collective somehow. We cannot do that alone. To play football or to play soccer involves to have these sports in the first place, which are very complicated. I mean, to be honest, I don't even understand it. I've seen sometimes some football games. I mean, my students, when I was at Notre Dame, they wanted me to go with them to a football game, and I had no idea what was going on. I remember the first time they told me that a football game would have taken a few hours, and so I took a book with me. So, then I had to put it away because people were complaining. But still, I don't really understand the rules. But these rules are, what the sport is about. So and they are not just made by one person at once. They've been, worked out over many years, and so this is something that expresses our nature as people who live with one another. So somehow is an expression of human nature as a social nature. So football says also that we are social beings or social animals, to use more traditional expressions. You made a choice for football, and we made a different choice for soccer. But this choice somehow is about the same thing. Is one way, two different ways to fulfill somehow an identical need. So there is a level in which things are different, and a deeper level in which they are the same. And think, for example, let's use another example. Let's think about what we are our discussion right now. So I mean, I'm the only one talking here, but but let's say that we are speaking somehow. I mean, you are listening to a language, and we are speaking English, of course. But I'm Italian. English is not my language, so I understand that sometimes the Italian inflection is charming for American people. At least this is what some of my students told me sometimes when I was trying to improve my pronunciation. But it's a different language, so I'm not really speaking my language. So language and English, like football and soccer, are, let's say that they are conventional. So it's something that can change, right? But what doesn't change is our need for language. We are beings that need to play. I mean, we cannot even imagine the existence of a human being who wouldn't play anything, any sport, who wouldn't enjoy belonging to a team or cheering up for a team, or wouldn't enjoy some compliments for playing better than others, as we couldn't have human beings who don't speak any language. Then you speak one language that is not mine. You speak English, I speak Italian as a native tongue. But we do have something in common, which is our linguistic nature. Let's introduce this concept of nature. So nature is what doesn't change, and that justifies its different changes, different languages. There is probably also, there are different levels of this natural element. For example, I mean, let's say there was a movie years ago in which the character found himself with totally different people in different cultures. So they didn't have anything in common, no dictionaries, no language. So the first way to communicate, to start to linguistically communicate, was actually pointing at things. So you would call chair something that I call sedia. How can we start communicating if we don't have anything in common, any linguistic convention in common? So I should just point to you one thing and tell you chair, chair, and you would say, oh, sedia, I understand. Okay, so clearly naming things is common to every language. That's what we can understand. We can start communicating even if we don't share the same language, but because we share linguistic nature. Every language would have a structure, some terms which indicate action and movement. So they are the verbs, right? They have, and there are proper names. You can say Fulvio, Fulvio, and the other person would understand that that would be my proper name. So there is something that is beneath language, and you can think of many other things that would make us create a common foundation for our communication and interaction. You can think of even our rationality. Imagine if if the structure of my intellect were completely different than yours. I mean, what I tell you wouldn't make any sense whatsoever. It would be like saying random things, actually making random sounds. So we share a common intellectual nature. My logic is your logic. That's why we can communicate. We can even disagree because of this. Disagreement only can happen if there is a deeper common ground for it. Think of feelings, emotions, passions. If you watch a movie, we can share the same passions because we do have something in common before the movies. So, since early Greek philosophy, there was a term, physis in Greek, in ancient Greek, but we would call it nature, which indicated one of the first really insights of philosophers, something that doesn't change beneath changes. And you can call, let's look at these things from a different perspective. Let's look at the need to play or the need to express ourselves linguistically as a principle, as something that is a cause of our playing football or soccer or tennis. So somehow the things that come before and make something possible as a choice, in the case of football or even English, I mean, in a sense, culture is a choice made by a bunch of people over centuries in a certain territory. So in a sense, culture is nature plus freedom compared to a lot of people altogether. So the individual freedom would be just different in wearing different kind of clothes and having different haircut, but an entire culture for those who still have hair to cut, right? But I still keep some of them, but some of it actually. So we actually have hair in Italian, which is plural. This is a kind of cultural difference too. So we cut them, you cut it. So it's different semantics, same concept. But what all these things that come before they are principles or causes, which is really interesting. It's the cause of something to happen. So the cause beneath the existence of soccer and football is a principle that comes before them. That's why with this thought experiment we've been trying to do now as an introduction is actually the attempt to look at something around us, to get deeper into whatever they are, whatever they mean, and looking for their principles, what can explain them at a deeper and a deeper and deeper level. So that's why, generally speaking, next time I'll try to sketch a better, a more structured definition of philosophy at its start, at least. But now I was just trying to introduce the idea of how to philosophize. And philosophy can be seen as a search for the first principles or causes of everything. Principles and causes are unlogically the same thing. They are synonyms. A principle is what comes before something, like the principle of a reasoning, right? Is the premise, is what actually comes first, and then you have the conclusion. And it's also what makes it possible, what causes it, what acts as a cause. So in a sense, even in a reasoning, the premise would be the cause, and the conclusion would be effect. So if the reasoning is correct, the premise, from some premises, should actually follow certain conclusions. Otherwise, the reasoning is not correct. But these are a cause-effect connection. So philosophy is a search for principles and causes of everything without any limitation. Just everything you look at can become a way to wonder about deeper things. But the beginning, and that's why I was telling you that I expect from you in this course to never stop wondering, because this happens when you are able to contemplate reality and being surprised constantly about something. You look at the ordinary things and you see something more. That's why Aristotle wrote that philosophy comes from wonder, originates from wonder. Wonder is at the beginning of philosophy, and it's not just a chronological thing. It's not like, historically or chronologically, wonder comes first. No, wonder is a constant attitude of the human soul, of the human spirit, that grounds the philosophical mind. So when we wonder about things, we see something that at first glance we might miss. So we watch a football game and we start wondering about human nature, for example. We are looking at the same thing, but one perspective would be just enjoying the football game and just cheering up for our team and checking the score, maybe thinking of how much a player is paid or something like that. Another perspective would be to wonder what actually makes football possible as a human endeavor, as a human action, and what makes the choice of football meaningful for a culture, and why a culture maybe is more inclined to certain sports than others. Actually, I'm not even sure that American football would be the first, sport in the U.S. I really don't know. Maybe some people would consider basketball the first sport. I understand that in the Triangle area, basketball is more, I might be saying something which is totally ungrounded, I know. But some people told me that basketball is pretty intense here. People love basketball, maybe more than football. But I'm not American, so who cares? So my point is not about what's the best national sport in the US. My point is that we should always be able to look at a deeper level reality and to wonder about everything, about ourselves and the world, and looking for deeper causes. But we don't just look at them, we reason about them, so it's a rational process. Another insight that came from Aristotle, but it is proper to Greek philosophy, Greek culture in general, is that this aspect of philosophy, wonder, is not proper only to philosophy. Every artist would share the same wonder, but the artist would see the same thing, would be able to look at reality and see something more. But then the poet or the artist would express this deeper meaning in in a way that is not a rational, connection between, concepts. It's not a sort of explanation. It's a visual message. It's a way to transfer it in a way that is the artistic way. So, but in a sense, Aristotle would say that poets and philosophers have the same starting point. They share the same main, insight on reality. But then they follow different paths. We introduced right now a key concept which we will deal with for a while in this course, which is the concept of nature as a first key concept at the birth of philosophy in Greece. We just mentioned it as a way to, get to it from some common things around us. And we mentioned some interesting features which I'll indicate better next time, that kind of ground the concept of philosophy at its birth in Greece, in ancient Greece, which are wonder and rationality as a search of some principles and causes of other things, of everything.